Welcome to Moonlit Ink BL. A BL story written under moonlight. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Boredom of the Abyss. The Grand Metropolitan Bank was a cathedral of glass and ego, designed to make the average person feel small. For Shawn Eastwood, it just felt drafty. He stood at the teller's counter, his posture as straight and lifeless as a mannequin's. Behind the plexiglass, the teller, a young beta whose scent was a frantic, citrusy mess of Monday morning anxiety, fumbled with a stack of withdrawal slips. "Mr. Eastwood, I just need one more signature for the verification," the teller stammered. Shawn didn't sigh, he didn't have the energy for it. He simply picked up the tethered pen. His own scent, the faint, hauntingly clean aroma of forget-me-nots, was so still it was almost undetectable. It didn't react to the crowded lobby, the oppressive heat, or the ticking clock. It was the scent of a stagnant pond in the middle of a forest, beautiful, perhaps, but eerily devoid of life. Then, the front doors didn't just open, they disintegrated. The sound of the explosion was a physical weight, shattering the glass partitions and sending a shockwave through the lobby. Uniformed men in matte black tactical gear swarmed the floor. The air was instantly scorched by the smell of ozone and the sharp, metallic tang of heavy-caliber weapons. Down! Everybody on the ground. Now! The scream started, high-pitched, jagged sounds that tore through the air. Alphas in the room flared their scents in a useless, instinctive show of territorial aggression. Omegas collapsed, their pheromones turning sour and thick with the stench of curdled milk and cold sweat. The lobby became a soup of primal terror. Shawn didn't move. He remained standing at the counter, the pen still poised over the paper. A heavy boot crunched on the glass behind him. A gloved hand gripped his shoulder, spinning him around with enough force to bruise. Shawn found himself staring into the void of a ballistic mask. "I said on the floor, you little," the gunman stopped. Strathmore had expected to smell the copper of blood or the suffocating musk of a panicked Omega. Instead, as he crowded into Shawn's personal space, he was hit by a wave of cool, floral indifference. It was like stepping out of a war zone and into a refrigerated flower shop. Kay's own scent, a predatory, suffocating cloud of woodsmoke and charred cedar, usually sent Omegas into a submissive faint. He leaned in closer, his dark eyes narrowing behind the slits of his mask. He wanted to see the pupils dilate. He wanted to feel the tremor in the boy's pulse. Shawn just looked at him. His eyes were a flat, washed-out gray, reflecting the gunman's mask like a mirror. "You're blocking the light," Shawn said, his voice a steady, melodic monotone. "I can't see where to sign." The lobby went silent, save for the sobbing of a woman under a nearby desk. Kay felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in years, genuine shock. He reached out, his gloved fingers tracing the line of Shawn's jaw, tilting his head back. He searched for a flicker of fear, a bead of sweat, a spike in that maddeningly neutral floral scent. Nothing. "Do you know where you are?" Kay growled, his voice a low vibration that usually commanded instant obedience. Shawn blinked once, slowly. "In a bank. During a heist. Are you almost done?" "I have an appointment at 2. Kay's grip tightened. He could feel the delicate pulse under Shawn's skin, it was slow, steady, and utterly bored. It was an insult to Kay's power, a rejection of the very nature of the Alpha-Omega dynamic. He felt a sudden, violent urge to rip off his mask and snarl into the boy's face just to see if he could make that forget-me-not scent turn into something sharp. "Boss," a voice crackled over the comms. "Vault's open. We've got 3 minutes before the perimeter is locked down. Move." Kay didn't move. He stayed locked in Shawn's vacant gaze for a heartbeat too long, memorizing the shape of his apathy. "Shawn Eastwood," Kay whispered, reading the name off the withdrawal slip on the counter. He leaned in until his mask brushed Shawn's ear, his woodsmoke scent flaring into a concentrated, suffocating heat. "I'm going to find out what it takes to make you scream." Kay pulled away, signaling his team with a sharp gesture. They retreated as quickly as they had arrived, vanishing into a cloud of smoke and screeching tires. As the sirens began to wail in the distance and the other hostages began to hyperventilate, Shawn turned back to the counter. He picked up the pen and finished his signature with a steady hand. He was the only person in the room who didn't smell like a victim. Chapter 2, The Phantom in the Smoke. The police investigation was, to Shawn, more exhausting than the heist itself. Detectives had poked and prodded, asking why he hadn't ducked, why he hadn't screamed, and why his heart rate, recorded by the bank's biometric security, had stayed at a resting 62 beats per minute. Shock, the lead investigator had eventually concluded with a dismissive wave. Delayed trauma. He'll crash in a week. But a week passed, and Shawn Eastwood did not crash. He returned to his routine like a clockwork toy wound too tight. He woke up in his minimalist apartment, drank his tea, and walked the same 4 blocks to the public library where he worked as an archival assistant. He was halfway through a stack of 19th-century land deeds when he first smelled it. Woodsmoke. It was faint, a ghostly trail of charred cedar that didn't belong in a room smelling of dust and decaying paper. Shawn didn't look up. He didn't tighten his grip on the archival gloves. He simply turned a page, his forget-me-not scent remaining as cool and stagnant as a frozen pond. 20 feet away, hidden behind the law and ethics stacks, Strathmore felt a vain pulse in his temple. K was a man who lived by the hunt. As an alpha, he was used to the prey reacting, the spike of adrenaline, the frantic glance over the shoulder, the submission. But Shawn was a ghost. For 3 days, K had followed him. He had watched Shawn eat a sandwich in a park, staring at a pigeon with the same intensity most people reserved for a solar eclipse. He had watched Shawn walk home in a torrential downpour without even opening an umbrella, his expression never shifting from that haunting, vacant neutrality. K leaned against the bookshelf, his eyes tracking the line of Shawn's neck. He wanted to reach out and snap that composure. He wanted to see if those gray eyes could actually produce tears. Does he even know I'm here? K wondered, his own scent flaring in a deliberate, aggressive wave of smoke. Shawn finally moved. He stood up, stacked the deeds with surgical precision, and walked toward the exit. He passed within 3 feet of K's hiding spot. He didn't turn his head. He didn't falter. But as he passed, Shawn spoke in a voice so low it was almost a hum. The History of Maritime Law section has better sightlines if you're planning to stay until closing. K froze. The smoke of his scent practically billowed in his shock. By the time he stepped out from the stacks, the library's heavy oak doors were swinging shut. Shawn was gone. The observation log, K's perspective. K sat in his blacked-out SUV that night, staring at the glowing windows of Shawn's 3rd-floor apartment. He opened a leather-bound notebook, not for heist plans, but for him. 8 o'clock apartment exit. Subject wore the same gray coat. Did not check for tail, scent, neutral. 12:30 City Park. Sat for 30 minutes. A dog barked in his face, he didn't blink. Scent, neutral and cooling. 1715 Public Library. Subject acknowledged presence. Scent, unchanged. K gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. It wasn't just a crush or a curiosity anymore, it was an itch under his skin that he couldn't scratch. Shawn wasn't just unbothered. He was a challenge to K's very existence. He reached into the passenger seat and picked up a small, transparent box. Inside was a single, pressed forget-me-not he had found dropped near the bank. "You think you're untouchable," K whispered into the dark cabin, the smell of wood smoke filling the car until it was suffocating. "But everyone has a breaking point, Shawn. I just have to find yours." Upstairs, Shawn stood by his window, looking down at the dark SUV parked illegally at the curb. He didn't close the curtains. He didn't lock the extra deadbolt. He simply watched the red glow of the SUV's taillights, wondering if the smell of wood smoke would eventually get into his clothes. It was the most interesting thing that had happened to him in 3 years. Chapter 3, the grocery aisle gambit. The 24-hour grocery store was a wasteland of fluorescent humming and linoleum. At 1:15 a.m., the aisles were populated only by a tired clerk and the low-frequency vibration of the industrial freezers. It was the kind of liminal space where Shawn felt most at home, cold, brightly lit, and utterly devoid of soul. Shawn stood in the breakfast aisle, his eyes scanning the shelves with the clinical detachment of a machine. He reached for a box of plain oats, his movements fluid and unhurried. Then, the air shifted. The sterile, chemical scent of floor wax was obliterated by a sudden, heavy intrusion of charred cedar and woodsmoke. It was thick, hot, and intentionally provocative. Shawn didn't turn around. He didn't even pull his hand back from the shelf. "You're a creature of habit, Shawn," a low, gravelly voice vibrated behind him. Strathmore didn't bother with the shadows this time. He stepped into the light, leaning one arm against the shelving unit, effectively caging Shawn against the wall of cereal boxes. Without the mask, Kay was even more imposing, all sharp angles, stubble, and eyes that burned with a restless, predatory hunger. He was dressed in a dark leather jacket that seemed to soak up the fluorescent light. Shawn finally turned his head. His expression was as flat as the cardboard boxes surrounding them. "Oats or granola?" he asked. Kay's eyes narrowed. He released a concentrated burst of alpha pheromones, a biological snarl designed to make an omega's knees buckle and their scent turn into a frantic plea for mercy. The woodsmoke smell became so intense it was almost visible. "I've been following you for 6 days, Kay growled, his face inches from Shawn's. "I broke into a federal vault and looked into the eyes of 50 people who thought they were going to die. They all had the decency to look terrified. Why didn't you?" Shawn looked at the bridge of Kay's nose, then down at the hand blocking his exit. His forget-me-not scent remained stubbornly, maddeningly faint. It didn't sour. It didn't spike. It just drifted, cool and floral, like a ghost in a burning forest. "Maybe I just recognized that you were efficient," Shawn said calmly. "Efficiency isn't scary. It's just, predictable." Kay let out a sharp, jagged laugh that sounded more like a threat. He reached out, his thumb dragging slowly across Shawn's lower lip. He was looking for a tremor, a gasp, any sign that the ice was cracking. "Predictable?" Kay leaned in until their foreheads touched. The heat radiating off the alpha was a stark contrast to the refrigerated air of the aisle. "I am a man who gets what he wants. And right now, I want to know what it takes to make you look at me with something other than boredom." Shawn didn't pull away. He didn't even blink. He just looked into Kay's dark, obsessive eyes and tilted his head a fraction of an inch. "You're standing on my shadow," Shawn remarked. "And you're blocking the honey nut oats. If you want to impress me, Kay, you'll have to do better than loitering in a grocery store." Kay's grip on the shelf tightened, the metal groaning under his strength. The rejection of his dominance was a physical blow, yet the way Shawn said his name, even in that monotone, sent a jolt through him that felt dangerously like a thrill. "This isn't a game, Shawn," Kay hissed. "Then stop playing it like one," Shawn replied. He stepped forward, forcing Kay to either move or engage in physical contact. For a second, Kay considered grabbing him, hauling him out of the store and into the dark SUV. But the utter lack of resistance in Shawn's posture made the idea feel hollow. He stepped back, his chest heaving slightly, the scent of woodsmoke swirling around them like a dying fire. Shawn grabbed his oats, walked past the most dangerous man in the city without a second glance, and headed toward the checkout. Kay watched him go, a dark, twisted smile finally tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Better than loitering," he muttered to himself, his pulse hammering. Challenge accepted. Chapter 4, The Art of the Breadcrumb. To the rest of the world, Shawn Eastwood was a blank canvas. To himself, he was a museum of sensory overload that had long ago shut down its exhibits to save on power. His apartment was a testament to this: white walls, gray furniture, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. People mistook his apathy for courage or coldness, but it was simpler than that. Since he was a child, the world had been too loud, the sense of others too pungent, their emotions too messy. He had learned to tune out the radio of life until all he heard was static. Until the woodsmoke. Shawn sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the box of oats he'd bought under Kay's predatory gaze. For the first time in years, the static had a melody. Kay Strathmore was a violent, obsessive, and likely unstable man, yet his presence was the only thing sharp enough to cut through Shawn's fog. He wants a reaction, Shawn thought, his fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. He wants to shatter the glass. A faint, ghostly smile, gone before it could even be called a ghost, touched Shawn's lips. If Kay wanted to play predator, Shawn would give him a trail to follow. The silent invitation. The next day, Shawn's routine deviated by exactly 3 degrees. The bookstore. Instead of his usual archival research, Shawn visited a cramped, second-hand bookstore. He spent 40 minutes in the back corner, tucked away in the poetry section. He knew Kay was there, he could smell the faint, restless scent of cedar behind the shelf of Victorian encyclopedias. Shawn pulled a book of Sylvia Plath poems, read a single page, and left it face down on the table. A specific line was underlined in light pencil: "I am vertical / but I would rather be horizontal." The train station. Shawn took the subway 3 stops past his usual exit. He stood on the crowded platform, letting the rush of commuters buffet him. He didn't look for Kay, but he felt the alpha's gaze like a physical weight on the back of his neck. As the train pulled in, Shawn dropped a small, dried forget-me-not flower onto the tracks just as the wind from the arriving car whipped past. The river walk. Shawn ended his day at the pier, staring out at the oily black water of the harbor. It was a secluded spot, dangerous after dark. He sat on a bench for an hour, his back completely exposed to the shadows where Kay was undoubtedly lurking. The hunter's frustration. Kay stood in the darkness of an abandoned warehouse pier, his lungs burning with the scent of salt and wood smoke. He was holding the book Shawn had left behind. His thumb brushed over the underlined text. "You're doing this on purpose," Kay whispered, his voice a ragged edge. He looked at the bench where Shawn sat, a slim, motionless figure against the vast, dark horizon. Every instinct Kay possessed screamed that this was a trap, a lure. Yet, he was powerless to stop. Shawn wasn't running, he was leading. Kay realized with a jolt of adrenaline that his prey was no longer just a victim of a heist. Shawn was an architect. He was building a labyrinth, and Kay was sprinting into the center of it. Shawn stood up and began to walk home. He didn't check to see if Kay was following. He didn't have to. The smell of wood smoke was now so familiar it felt like his own shadow. As Shawn turned the corner toward his apartment, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a spare key. He didn't drop it. He simply held it loosely in his hand as he walked past a dark alleyway, letting the metal glint once in the moonlight before disappearing inside his building. He didn't lock the lobby door behind him. Chapter 5: The Savior's Shadow. The alleyway behind the library was a throat of brick and damp shadows, a shortcut Shawn took every Tuesday evening. It was the perfect stage for a performance. Halfway through the passage, 3 men stepped out from behind a row of rusted dumpsters. They weren't wearing tactical gear this time, they wore the ragged, desperate look of street thugs. One flicked a switchblade open, the click echoing sharply against the narrow walls. "Wallet. Phone. Now, pretty boy," the one in the center growled. He was a beta, his scent a foul, synthetic musk of cheap cigarettes and unwashed adrenaline. Shawn stopped. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't even look at the knife. He stood there, a pale column of indifference in the dark, his forget-me-not scent remaining as still as a frozen lake. "I have $20 and a library card," Shawn said tonelessly. "The card is more valuable to me than the cash." The thug sneered, stepping closer. "Think you're funny? I'll see if you laugh when." A low, vibrating growl cut through the air, vibrating in the very marrow of their bones. The temperature in the alley seemed to spike as a suffocating wave of wood smoke and charred cedar flooded the space. Kay stepped out from the darkness behind Shawn, his presence dwarfing everyone in the alley. He didn't look like a savior, he looked like a god of ruin. With a terrifying, fluid grace, he grabbed the lead thug's wrist, the sound of snapping bone punctuating the silence. A swift kick sent the second man sprawling, and the third fled before Kay could even turn his head. In seconds, the alley was quiet again, save for the whimpering of the man on the ground. Kay turned to Shawn, his chest heaving, his alpha pheromones thick and commanding. He stepped into Shawn's space, placing a heavy, warm hand on the wall beside Shawn's head. This was the moment. The rescue. The debt. You should be more careful, Shawn, Kay rasped, his eyes burning with a dark, triumphant light. The city isn't safe for someone who doesn't know how to look afraid. He waited for the gratitude. He waited for the trembling. The performance was a bit much, don't you think? Shawn asked, finally meeting Kay's gaze. The broken wrist was a nice touch, but the timing was too theatrical. Kay's smirk flickered and died. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. I just saved your life. You don't even know who I am. Everyone knows who you are, Kay Strathmore, Shawn replied. His voice was steady, unimpressed. The smoke of the South Side. The alpha who walked out of the Federal Reserve with 60 million and didn't leave a single fingerprint. You're quite infamous. I recognized your scent the moment you stepped into the bank last week. Kay froze. The hand on the wall tightened, bricks beginning to crumble under his grip. He had spent weeks meticulously stalking Shawn, thinking he was the one in control, the one holding the secrets. You knew. Kay hissed, the woodsmoke scent flaring in a mix of fury and fascination. You knew it was me this whole time, and you didn't say a word to the police. Why would I? Shawn tilted his head, his neck exposed and vulnerable, yet his eyes remained chillingly calm. The police are boring. They follow rules. You're the first thing I've encountered in years that doesn't follow a script. Well, except for this rescue. This was very scripted. Shawn reached out, a move so unexpected that Kay actually flinched, and straightened the collar of Kay's leather jacket. If you wanted a formal introduction, Kay, you could have just asked, Shawn whispered. Now, are we going to stand here until your thugs come back for their medical pay, or are you going to take me to dinner? For the first time since the heist, Kay Strathmore was the one who couldn't breathe. The predator had caught the prey, only to realize the prey had been holding the leash the entire time. Chapter 6, The Feast of Shadows. Dinner was not held at a crowded restaurant or a candlelit bistro. Kay took Shawn to a place that matched his own jagged soul, a private loft overlooking the industrial docks, where the windows were reinforced steel and the air tasted of salt and electricity. The table was set with a brutalist elegance, dark slate plates, heavy silver, and a meal that smelled of rosemary and red wine. But the real feast was the tension vibrating between them. Kay had discarded his leather jacket, revealing the tensed muscles of his forearms beneath a rolled-up black dress shirt. He didn't sit across from Shawn, he sat at the corner, close enough that their knees nearly brushed. He was done with the games, or so he told himself. Eat, Kay commanded, though he hadn't touched his own plate. His eyes were fixed on the column of Shawn's throat. Shawn picked up his fork with the same mechanical grace he used to archive books. He took a bite of the steak, chewed slowly, and set the utensil down. The rosemary is a bit overpowering. It clashes with the cedar. Kay's jaw tightened. He leaned in, his wood smoke sent no longer a roar, but a low, smoldering heat that filled the room. I didn't bring you here to critique the seasoning, Shawn. I brought you here because I'm tired of looking at a statue. I want to know what's inside the marble. You want me to break, Shawn stated. It wasn't a question. You've spent your whole life forcing the world to bend to your will. When I didn't bend at the bank, I became the only thing you couldn't own. And you hate not owning things, don't you, Kay? I don't want to own you, Kay hissed, though the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. I want to feel you. I want to know that if I cut you, you'll bleed. If I kiss you, you'll burn. Kay reached out, his large hand cupping the back of Shawn's neck. It was a dominant, possessive gesture, an alpha's claim. He let his pheromones bleed out in a slow, intoxicating wave, designed to bypass the mind and trigger the primal, submissive instincts of an omega. He wanted to see Shawn's eyes glaze over. He wanted to see that forget-me-not scent turn sweet and heavy with need. Shawn didn't pull away. Instead, he did something that paralyzed Kay. He leaned into the palm. He tilted his head back, exposing the pale, vulnerable line of his pulse point, and looked Kay directly in the eye. "Then do it," Shawn whispered. His voice was still a monotone, but for the first time, there was a vibration in it, a frequency of genuine curiosity. "Show me the fire you're so proud of. Because so far, Kay, you're just smoke." The insult hit Kay like a physical strike. In a blur of motion, he stood, pulling Shawn up with him by the nape of his neck. He backed Shawn against the floor-to-ceiling window, the dark harbor stretching out behind them. "You think you're so hollow that nothing can touch you?" Kay growled, his face inches from Shawn's. "You think you're safe because you don't care if you live or die?" "I'm not safe," Shawn said softly. "I'm just waiting." At that moment, the power dynamic didn't just shift, it inverted. Kay realized that Shawn wasn't resisting him, he was consuming him. Shawn was the void that Kay's fire was desperately trying to fill, and the more Kay gave, the more Shawn stayed the same. Then, it happened. A flicker. A spike. The scent of forget-me-nots didn't turn sour with fear. It bloomed. It became deep, intoxicating, and honeyed, the scent of a flower opening in the middle of a graveyard. It was a reaction, but not the one Kay had spent weeks hunting for. It was the scent of an omega who had finally found a reason to stop being bored. Kay's grip loosened in pure, unadulterated shock. He watched as Shawn's pupils finally dilated, not from the alpha's command, but from Shawn's own burgeoning interest. "There you are," Kay whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of triumph and terror. "Here I am," Shawn replied. He reached up, his fingers tracing the scar on Kay's cheek. "Now, what are you going to do with me?" The moment was interrupted by the sharp, rhythmic pulsing of a red light on the loft's security panel. Kay's crew was calling. The outside world, the one that still followed the rules of heists and gunmen, was crashing back in. Chapter 7, The Surgical Shift. The red light on the security panel was the last thing Shawn saw before a concussive blast turned the loft into a storm of glass and shadow. When the world stopped spinning, Shawn found himself hauled into the back of a delivery van, his wrists bound with industrial-grade zip ties. Miller, Kay's second-in-command, sat across from him, his face a mask of sweating, alpha-driven resentment. "You're the glitch in the system, Eastwood," Miller snarled, checking the chamber of his sidearm. "Kay used to be a ghost. Now he's a liability because he can't stop sniffing around a statue. We're going to drop you in the harbor, and Kay's going to get his head back in the game." Shawn sat against the vibrating wall of the van. He didn't plead. He didn't even look at Miller. Instead, he closed his eyes and inhaled. He could smell the cheap grease of the van's engine, the salt of the nearby docks, and the frantic, disorganized scent of the 3 betas in the front seat. He felt the familiar, cold void in his chest, but for the first time, it wasn't empty. It was focused. "You're making a tactical error," Shawn said, his voice a calm, melodic chime against the roar of the road. "Shut up," Miller snapped. "You've focused all your aggression on Kay," Shawn continued, opening his eyes. They were flat and gray, like a winter sea. "You assume that because I am an omega, and because I am indifferent, I am also helpless. But indifference isn't a weakness, Miller. It's a lack of distraction." The van lurched to a halt inside a derelict cannery. The doors swung open to a cavernous, rusted interior. As they hauled Shawn out, Miller leaned in, his scent turning foul with the intent to kill. "Last words?" "Just one," Shawn whispered. In a motion so fluid it looked rehearsed, Shawn didn't pull away, he leaned in. He used the leverage of Miller's own grip to drive his forehead into the bridge of the man's nose. The crunch of bone was the starting gun. As Miller recoiled, clutching his face, Shawn spun. He didn't struggle against the zip ties, he used them. He looped the plastic cord over the neck of the nearest guard, using his body weight to drop the man to the floor. He was surgical. He didn't use rage, he used physics. A heavy industrial stapler sat on a nearby crate. Shawn snatched it, using the edge of the metal to saw through his restraints with a rhythmic, steady hand. By the time the third guard reached for his holster, Shawn was already free. He didn't run. He stepped into the guard's space, his forget-me-not scent flaring, not with fear, but with a cold, predatory sharpness that mimicked the Alpha's own aggression. He disarmed the man with a wrist lock that sent the pistol skittering across the concrete. He didn't fire it. He simply took the spare magazine, emptied the rounds onto the floor, and used the heavy butt of the gun to silence the guard's protests. 5 minutes. That was how long it took for Shawn to neutralize the room. When the heavy loading doors finally groaned open and a frantic, woodsmoke-scented Alpha burst in with a rifle raised, the scene was not what he expected. Strathmore skidded to a halt, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had come to save his obsession. He had come to burn the world down to get Shawn back. Instead, Kay found Shawn standing in the center of the cannery, calmly wiping a smear of blood from his cheek with a handkerchief. Miller was slumped against a pillar, unconscious and bound with his own belt. The other 2 guards were incapacitated in a neat row. The warehouse was silent. The scent of forget-me-not was everywhere, heavy, crystalline, and utterly triumphant. Shawn turned to look at Kay. His gray eyes were wide, glowing with a newfound, jagged clarity. "You're late, Kay," Shawn said, a small, dark smile finally breaking the ice of his face. "But the timing is still acceptable." Kay lowered his rifle, his own scent of woodsmoke swirling in a mix of shock and a new, terrifying level of arousal. He hadn't just found an Omega to protect. He had found his equal. Chapter 8, The New Equilibrium. The wail of sirens was no longer a distant hum, it was a rhythmic, pulsing pressure against the cannery's rusted walls. Red and blue lights flickered through the high, grimy windows, painting the scene of Shawn's efficiency in the colors of an emergency. Kay didn't move for a heartbeat, his rifle hanging slack in his hand. He looked at Miller, broken and bound by his own belt, and then back to Shawn. The forget-me-not scent wasn't just blooming anymore, it was a territorial claim. It was sharp, cold, and utterly dominant in its own quiet way. "You're full of surprises, Eastwood," Kay rasped, his woodsmoke scent finally losing its jagged edge of panic and settling into a deep, vibrating hum of admiration. "I told you," Shawn said, stepping over a stray shell casing with a dancer's grace. "Efficiency isn't scary. It's just, practical." He reached out, his fingers brushing the tactical vest over Kay's chest. "But we're about to be very inefficient if we stay here. Your SUV is outside. Armored. V8 engine," Kay grinned, a dark, exhilarated spark igniting in his eyes. He grabbed Shawn's hand, not to lead him, but to join him. "And I left the keys in." They burst through the side exit just as the first perimeter of squad cars screeched into the lot. The black SUV sat idling in the shadows of an adjacent warehouse, a silent beast of matte metal. Kay vaulted into the driver's seat, but as he reached to shift into gear, Shawn was already there, his hand overlapping Kay's on the gear stick. "Let me," Shawn said. Kay blinked, then let out a sharp, barking laugh. He slid into the passenger seat, handing over the reins of his escape to the man who, 20 minutes ago, he thought was a victim. "Show me what else you've been hiding, Shawn." The engine roared, a guttural, mechanical snarl that drowned out the sirens. Shawn floored it. The chase was a blur of neon and wet asphalt. Shawn drove with the same surgical detachment he used to archive books, weaving through the police blockade with inches to spare. He didn't white-knuckle the steering wheel, He held it loosely, his expression as calm as a Sunday morning, even as the speedometer climbed past 100 miles per hour. Behind them, a swarm of patrol cars struggled to keep up with the SUV's erratic, high-precision maneuvers. Kay watched Shawn, mesmerized. Every time a car tried to pit them, Shawn would tap the brakes at the exact millisecond required to make the officer oversteer into a guardrail. "You're insane," Kay whispered, the smell of charred cedar flaring in the cabin, thick with a new, intoxicating brand of devotion. "I'm just bored of following the speed limit," Shawn replied. He took a sharp turn into a narrow alleyway, the side mirrors missing the brick walls by a hair's breadth. He killed the headlights, drifting the heavy vehicle into the darkness of an underground loading bay he had mapped out in his head days ago. The police screamed past the entrance, their sirens fading into the distance. Silence returned, heavy and electric. The SUV's engine ticked as it cooled. In the cramped, dark cabin, the scents of woodsmoke and forget-me-not collided, spinning together into a new, singular fragrance, the smell of a fire that had finally found something it couldn't consume, only dance with. Kay reached across the center console, cupping Shawn's jaw. The Omega didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch, his eyes finally reflecting the fire he had inspired. "So," Kay breathed, his thumb tracing the dried blood on Shawn's lip. "Where to now?" "I have 60 million in a dead drop in Jersey and a plane waiting in a private hangar." Shawn looked at the dark dashboard, then back at the Alpha who had spent weeks trying to break him, only to be remade in his image. "Jersey is boring," Shawn said, his voice dropping to a low, velvet hum. "Let's go to the hangar. I've always wanted to see the world from high enough to make everything look like a miniature." He leaned in, finally closing the distance. The kiss wasn't a surrender, it was a merger. The predator and the statue had vanished, leaving behind two ghosts who finally had a reason to run.